let's forge on. So number 40. Samanya Jayat Jvalanam. Let me get my book open so that we have case, because some of this vocabulary is a little technical and it's used in ways that it's not used anywhere else in Sanskrit literature. So sometimes in the sutras, you find a word that you think you know it from somewhere else, but it means something different here. So it's good to have so I got my book here, off we go. So remember, all of these passages are about what does he call it? I'm having a senior moment. Dhyana Dharana. The three of them together is called what is it called? It's not Samanyat.
Samyama.
Samyama. These are all about doing samyama, which means intense concentration, okay? And intense concentration, the way that all of these cities seem to be, the mechanisms behind them is that you can break the confinements. Your buddhi is not restricted to your body karmically. I'm just going to repeat the general principle. So we all have buddhis and minds, but we're karmically contained in our bodies. And, the dog's chitta is contained in its body, but you can free that. You can break those bonds of karma by intense concentration. And then your buddhi can seep out and join the cosmic buddhi. Because after all, all of this prakriti that we see out there is just the three gunas. It's all the three gunas. And the three gunas then becomes buddhi, your Sankhya charts. Then the buddhi becomes ego, then it becomes the tanmatras and the mahabhutas. It becomes qualities, then it becomes subatomic particles. What that means is that the substratum of everything is mind stuff. And by the way, I couldn't remember the word last time. It's panpsychism. It was a position in philosophy. This is a philosopher. It's nothing to do with, Indian tradition or any tradition. That there is a school in philosophy, and I think it probably has some scientists that are interested in it, that if you keep going, right, so subatomic particles, so you got atoms and then, subatomic, whatever, muons and gluons and bosons, and then now maybe strings, right? If you keep going, at the root of all reality, there's mind stuff. That position is called pan, right? Like everywhere, psychism. And it was sort of, it emerged, I don't know, 67, I don't know, it emerged sort of decades ago and then got relegated to the margins. It's now making a comeback. So that's very interesting for people that are interested in dialogue between Sankhya and philosophy, because Sankhya would say precisely that at the basis of all materiality, nothing to do with consciousness, talking prakriti here, but at the basis of all, of all reality, there is buddhi. Okay, intelligence. It's inanimate. It's only when the purushas are injected into prakriti that there is awareness. So in other words, you could have intelligence but no awareness. For example, you could set up a computer and you could have the software operating and it would be doing all kinds of amazing intelligent things, but it wouldn't be self-aware. The computer wouldn't be aware of what it was doing, but it could still be intelligent and operating. So that's actually, the computer is really a useful analogy for us in that sense. So Sankhya would posit that at the basis of all reality, there's mind stuff, buddhi, intelligence, organizational. I don't know. Maybe that's what the Greeks thought of as mathematics. Because after all, what is mathematics other than sort of systematic arrangements of numerals? And what are numerals other than a systematization? Numbers themselves are a systematization. So therefore, when things are systematically organized and then they come together and create more and more complex things, that's intelligence. So numbers come together and then you get algebra and you get all kinds of sort of advanced mathematics. So Sankhya would say the first from the three gunas, which are just inferred. They're inferred in Sankhya. Although it is said that yogis can perceive the raw gunas themselves, the substructure of everything. But buddhi is the next evolute. You've all seen your charts, and we had it up the last week. So the yogi's buddhi, and then everything comes from buddhi. So at least it's if you accept that metaphysics, or you don't have to accept or reject it. Remember, we're teaching this from within the parameters of Sankhya metaphysics. Not a question of accepting or rejecting. That's your personal opinion. We're looking for the logic and the coherence of Sankhya as a logical, rational, metaphysical system. Within that system, it is coherent, logical. Within that system, that there is this cosmic buddhi from which everything emerges, and then the jivas at the end of the cosmic cycle are injected into it. They're injected into Prakriti, and then each jiva gets its own individual covering. And I gave you the example of the balloon. I think it's a great example. And you push your fingers in the balloon, and without popping it, and now the balloon is wrapped around each individual finger. Each individual finger is tightly wrapped by the balloon, but those wrappings are connected to the rest of the balloon. Isn't that a great analogy? So does it work? So therefore, in principle, our buddhis are the same as the cosmic buddhi, but they're just delimited by karma. That's one thing that karma does. It delimits. It imposes. The effects of past activities become imposed on us in the form of things that happen to us, but not just the things that our very bodies themselves and the samskaras that are activated in our subtle bodies for a particular birth. That's predetermined by karma. So those are karmic bonds. In fact, another word for karma is bandhana. Bandhana is an Indo-European. You can hear it sounds like bond. It's an old word, going back to the old Indo-European, the B, N, and the DH, bond. So another word for karma is bandhana, that which binds us. So the yogi can break that. So it's not magic, and if it's explained, and if we really think about it carefully, it's coherent to Sankhya metaphysics. That's all I'm saying. Coherent to, personally, I take it very seriously. But even if you don't, if you say, well, that doesn't work in terms of modern physics, that's fine. But at least from within the system, so coherent to say that these bandhanas can be broken. Okay, so, and that lies at the basis of many of these mystic powers. So back we go. We were on 3940. So from concentrating on this samana, I'm sure some of you know the pranas better than I do. It's one of the pranas. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about all the nadis. I mean, that if you're interested in that, then the Tantra traditions are the place to look, because they're much more interested in this whole the nadi system and the chakra system and the kundalini and the sushumna and everything. And the Hatha traditions have really entered deeply and systematized that. So if you're interested in in that kind of subtle physiology, remember, yoga it doesn't reject it. It just barely says anything about it, because yoga wants to go beyond that to the Purusha itself. So it's not interested either in the gross body or the subtle body. But the subtle body has pranas, one of which is samana, and the commentators say it's associated with digestion. So, but anyway, if you concentrate on that, you get radiance. Don't ask me what the connection is, but radiance, of course, and radiance, of course, is the sattva. When you're when a very, very controlled, when you have to be sattvic to control the mind. You can't meditate when you're rajasic, because some of us who are very rajasic by nature, we have a kind of problem concentrating because our natures are rajasic. But you have to be sattvic. Stillness and tranquility and peacefulness is sattva. So in intense states of sattva, there's radiance, and that's, of course, the effulgence that you see that's so common in medieval Christian art, Byzantine art. You have the saints with their halos. So what is that? What are the halos? Well, the yogis would say that's just the radiance seeping out, sattva seeping out. So you get radiant, you become radiant, all right? And it's associated with this particular prana. This is one of those verses that the commentators don't say very much. So you can tell that they're a little bit out of their area of interest. When they don't say very much, it means, well, okay, that, they just sort of, they're commenting on it because it's there, but they don't have anything to say. So, which means they don't have any particular insights, which means that unlike other sutras, which means it's not something they're particularly interested in. Right, now, by samyama, okay, all of this is samyama, which is just another word of saying, sort of dharana, dhyana, samadhi, all of this intense concentration, sabija samadhi, not nirbija. Nirbija, you're not aware of anything. So you do intense concentration on, he's just giving a sample of some of these, what we might call supernormal. So they're not magic, not mystical. I mean, it depends what you mean by mystical. If by mystical we mean supernormal, that's fine. If by mystical we mean magic, no. If magic means making something happen from nothing, no. None of this is magic in that sense. It all depends on how you want to define these terms, because they're very vague in our Western traditions. Because, because there isn't the depth of metaphysics in our folklores, in our sort of magic traditions. We don't necessarily have this kind of metaphysical specificity that is so typical of Indian intellectuality. Indian intellectuals, whether it's Vedanta or astronomy or Ayurveda, was so, intellectualities. They schematize, they organize, they created categories. Really think about it. Okay, this doesn't, why are there 5 vrittis? Well, you have to, that's the bare minimum. Each of them are irreducible to anything else. So you end up with 5. And whatever it is, you'll find lists and schematization are so typical of Indian intellectuality, and it's the sign of intense analysis. You analyze something, analyze it, break it down until it can't be broken down anymore. Then you end up with categories. So, by sanyama, okay, on the sambandha, the relationship, shrotra akasha, on the organ of hearing in the ether. The ether, I was talking about that with a friend today, ether. Science no longer accepts ether. It was accepted at Newton's time. And I'm actually would be interested in if anybody has an article or anything on why do we no longer accept ether? Why did ether become rejected as a category of physics? If anybody knows the reason for that, I'd be interested in hearing that. I'm sure it's available, anywhere on Wiki, but if anyone happens to know. So we don't accept that anymore, but Sankhya does. So who knows? Maybe it'll make a comeback like panpsychism did. But right now, physics does not accept a thing called ether. But Sankhya does. And that's how sound travels, right? So you have 5 senses, and taste is connected with earth. Remember, Sankhya is a process of inference. Vedanta is a process of textual interpretation, scripture, divine revelation. Remember the 3 epistemes that Patanjali talks about. What are the pramanas? There's Pratyaksha, verse 7, right at the beginning of the sutra. Pratyaksha Anumana Agama. Some schools have 1, some schools have 6. But how do you know something? How do I know something? How, epistemology. So Vedanta is all about, we know things, ultimate things. We can know mundane things through the senses. We can know mundane things through inference. But you cannot know Bhagavan, Brahman, except through revelation. You can know there is a Brahman. You can know there is an Ishvara, but you can know nothing more than that. Ishvara could be a demon. Even Descartes said that. Ishvara, what do I know? I don't even know there's a God, says Descartes. And even if there is, how do I know he's not a demon? So, and then he ends up saying, the only thing I know, right, Descartes, is that I'm thinking these thoughts. So he comes up with his famous cogito ergo sum. So Vedanta would say, you can know anything. The jurisdiction of the other 2 forms of knowledge, pratyaksha, anumana, sense perception and inference, their jurisdiction is material things, prakritic things. Anything beyond that is John, if that's a reference, can you email it to me? Because I don't want to interrupt and go into the chat right now. So therefore, the only thing you know about Brahma, why is Krishna blue? There's nothing rational about that. It's totally transrational. So why would you think such a thing? Only if it was revealed. So Vedanta would say you can know there is a God, right? But you don't know anything about God unless it's revealed. Now, but Sankhya is not in that line. Sankhya is in the line of inference. So all those categories that you see on your chart, they're all inferred. So they infer that, okay, what do we have 5 senses, and the eye sees form. So therefore, there's a connection between the eye and form. And well, let's start with the lowest, the most tamasic is smell. So smell is associated with earth. And then the next one is taste, rasa, and taste is associated with liquid. So you have earth. So each of you have 5 senses, and they're completely different. So they must have different substratums, because they're completely different. The taste is a sensation completely different from a visual. So therefore, they determine that wherever there's taste, there is the earth element. So okay, well, I'm sorry, not a taste is water. The smell is the earth element. Taste is water. So if you take water out of something, it has no taste, like dry bread. And then they associate visual with fire, luminosity, light. And then they associate sort of, hearing with the ear with hearing. Sorry, what do we have? Touch. So there has to be air to feel something. There has to be the air element. All right. So now you've got these 4, and then they make the inference. Well, then what is the ear associated with? So they come up with a category of ether. That there must be an element through which sound is transmitted. And they consider that to be ether. So this verse is saying, right, that this verse is saying that that by doing sambandha on this relationship between the hearing and the ether, you get divine supernormal abilities. You can hear things that you go beyond the limitations of your. Basically, it's the same principle, my friends. You break out beyond the limitations of your senses. So you can hear it. I mean, they're going to say you can hear anything anywhere. Because, I mean, all sound is in sort of vibrating in the air, right? Because if you emit a sound, it's moving subatomic particles, which is moving the next subatomic, which is it's pervading the whole universe. Didn't someone make that comment about the butterfly wing? That the butterfly wing is sort of, if you move one subatomic entity, it's going to push the next one. It's going to push the next one on some microscopic, infinitesimally microscopic sort of way. Everything is connected to everything else. So therefore, sound is vibrating all over. So the yogi can bypass the limitations of his or her sense organs, karmically endowed, and get this divyam shrotram, divine, which simply means supernormal, which means what? The range is, you can hear anything. If you can be omniscient, it's going to, in a few verses, it's going to say you can be omniscient. So you can be omni-hearing and omni-smelling and omni-tasting. Your senses are no longer restricted. Take it or leave it. And so another ether coming up, Kaya Akasha. So these are Akash, is the ether. And Kaya Akasha Sambandha Samyam. See the Samyama. Lagu Tula Sampate Cha Akasha Gamanam. If you do samyama on the relationship of the body and ether, and you concentrate on it, and they give this example of the lightness of cotton. The way I understand this is you can transform your body. Remember, the gunas are always, like Krishna says in the Gita, they're always competing. So I don't think of it as, my thinking on this is still something I think about intensely. But I used to think there were 3 gunas, like 3 colors. Okay, there's red. Let's say you have red, yellow, blue, and they're autonomous colors. And then when you mix them, you get an infinity of colors. I used to think of it like that, but it's not. They're not three distinct things. There's one Prakriti. And so that one Prakriti has these three potentials. So therefore, that means that if you're very tamasic, you can transform into sattva. One guna can transform into the other. So I don't think of it anymore as three distinct. Guna just means a quality. I don't think of it as distinct gunas anymore. I think of it as an entity. It's prakritic, but it's still way beyond our comprehension because it's prior to buddhi. It's prior to intellect. So intellect can't understand even the mysteries, but I don't mean mystery in any magical sort of sense. It's just a level of physics beyond our buddhi, because buddhi is secondary to the raw gunas themselves. So I think of it now, because if you're going to say there are three things, what are the dividing lines? What's the barrier between one and the other, right? Subatomic entities have a property called a vishesha, which keeps a subatomic entity, and it doesn't dissolve. So the gunas don't have a vishesha, keeping them distinct one from the other. So it's one thing, it's prakriti. And the reason I'm sort of, saying something about that is because you can sattvasize your entire mind, and you can, and somehow bypass your karmic confinements, and your sattva can then pervade the sattvic dimension of the universe, and you get a divine hearing. It simply means that you can tap into, by sattvasizing your mind, freeing it from its confines in the body, you can then penetrate, merge. Why not? You still have your ego, so it's still you controlling it. You don't dissolve, but you can, just like you can control your mind around this body, and then you become an elephant, you control your mind stuff around an elephant body, so it can expand then. So you can just keep expanding it and attain divine hearing. You can hear things that are normally remote or accessible normally to the normal senses. So, and the way to do it is by doing the samyama on the relationship between verse 41, the ear and ether, and on this one you do it to your body. So you can walk on water, to use a classical example, and one acquires the ability to travel through the sky. Akasha gamanam, the going akasha, into the ether. And we've all read the stories, my friends, even modern stories like Autobiography of a Yogi. I mean, this is even in the Christian tradition. You have, you can have, great sages can just travel instantly. And here it's called Akasha Gamanam, going through the sky, like great sages like Narada Muni. Whenever his disciple in some part of the universe needs him, he appears instantly. Narada is the one with the Veena. He's always chanting the glories of Sri Vishnu. So he has his Veena and doing constant kirtan, and he appears. Like when the great sage Vyas is the author of the first commentator on the Yoga Sutras. Let's throw in a story from time to time, my friends. I don't just want to do boring old sutras. Let's do a little bhakti as well. So he composed the Mahabharata. He's the divider, Vyasa. His name means the divider. He divided the one Veda into four. He divided the one Purana into four. So he's like the great master literary. He's even considered to be an Anksha, Narayana Anksha, an Anksha, like not full Narayan, but what's called a partial incarnation. There are all kinds of incarnations. Again, this wonderful schematizing penchant of Indian intellectuality. It's not just an avatara. There are all types of avatara. Okay, so one of them is that you a Shaktavesha. You're not actually a manifestation of Vishnu, but Vishnu invests Shakti into you. So maybe Patanjali. I know a Patanjali Shesha, so that's a little bit different. I don't know. Maybe Shesha is a Shakta, but Vyasa is a Shakta Vesha. He has this Shakti that he can do all this amazing literary output. And then one day he's done all of this. He's written all, even he's written all of the Dharma Shastras. He's written the Vedanta Sutra, Badarayana. He's written. He's divided the. He has disciples. They're mentioned. So he assigns some of the different Puranas to different disciples like Romaharshana. He divides the Vedas. So he knows Sanskrit literature from beginning to end. He compiles it all. And this is the beginning of Kali Yuga when writing comes to be, which is a bad sign. We think it's a big step forward, but in the Indian tradition, it means you can't remember anymore. It's a sign of weak intelligence, that you need a prop. You need an artificial mechanism to preserve information. And so writing is devised because you can't remember stuff anymore. So anyway, so he's sitting there despondent, and Narada appears, Akasha Gamana, according to the sutra. Akasha Gamana. He appears through the air and he says to Vyas, why are you so despondent? And Narada says, you've written the Mahabharata, you've written all about dharma, you've outlined the goals of life, because Vyas is lamenting for the well-being of the world. He's a great not bodhisattva, but equivalent. And he's just, feeling, and Narada says, you've written even about moksha. Why are you despondent? And Vyas says, well, I don't know, you tell me what, and then Narada says, because you haven't written about Bhagavan fully. And therefore your heart is, even though you've attained moksha, you've perceived your own Atman, you're still discontent because you haven't perceived the Supreme Being. So then Vyas writes the Bhagavata Purana, the great Bhagavata Purana, which is the text that we'll be doing after we're done with all these sutras. So Narada is the great Akasha Gamanam. He's the Gatra, the great goer in the Akash, and he appears when so great sages have this ability, and we see this even in modern hagiographies. If you read Paramahamsas, I think, as I recall it, as many decades ago, but his guru would appear to him, maybe Muktananda as well. I can't remember. So this going, okay, and how do you get it? By doing concentration on the relationship between body and Akasha, the ether. And I would again think of it as becoming so sattvic, so sattvic that you can walk on water and you can travel through the air, because ether is more subtle than air. So therefore air is heavy compared to ether. And therefore, if you can somehow maximize your ethereal potential of your body, air is not an obstacle. I don't know. Anyway, here we go. Verse 42. Now we have Bahir Akalpita Vritti. Look, there's your Vritti. Yogashita Vritti, Nirodha. Mahavideha Tata Prakashavaranakshayaha. Now, he says there is the great not imagined Vritti. Well, in other words, you can leave your body. It's kind of the same as the previous one. Well, maybe not. You can leave your body and just travel about in your subtle body. And he calls it the akalpita vritti, because what does he mean by this? When we vritti, we can leave our bodies. Right? If I'm thinking of Rome, I'm sitting here on the Isle of Wight and I'm thinking of Rome, well, so I've left my body then. And my vrittis are in Rome, but those are kalpita. Look at the word here. Kalpita, imagined. I'm imagining Rome. Kalpana is imagination. So we leave our bodies all the time. We're floating all over the place in our thoughts. But this is akalpita, not imagined, meaning the yogi can actually leave the gross body. I suppose he would leave it in some kind of an asana, sitting there in some kind of a, not rigor mortis exactly, but a rigor yogic, rigor mortis, when the body freezes up at death. Well, it's some kind of a rigor yogis, right? The body wouldn't have a functioning mind anymore. So if you go in a cave and there's a body that's just immobile, be careful. The yogi might be floating about and, about to come back. In fact, there's a story Oh, I told you the story about Shankara. Um, but the part I didn't tell you was, oh, here's the part I didn't tell you. Remember the Shankara when he was debating the wife of Mandana Mishra, his first disciple, the great Shankara Advaitin, the great, he wasn't the first Advaitin, but he was the founder of Advaita Vedanta and the first Vedanta Sutra commentary that we have. So he left. So he was debating, a mimamsa, a ritualist, a Vedic ritualist, and whoever in those days, if you had the debate and you won the debate, then the person that lost becomes your disciple, and all the disciples come. All these disciples, they dump their guru, and they go, and then and you become their guru, right? So it's so he's debating, a lot at stake here, right? Because all his Shankara's disciples are sitting there, Vedantins, Mandana Mishra's disciples are sitting there, the ritualists, the Vedic ritualists. We'll do a quick workshop on Mimamsa because I want to do all 6 schools, and that's it. Then we do Bhagavatam. So after we've done the Yoga Sutra, we're left with 2. Vaisheshika will maybe do a very, very short one. And Mimamsa, we'll try to do something on Mimamsa. Then at least we'll have a sense of the 6 schools of philosophy. They're up there on the website, and whoever wants them can avail of them. And I think it's important to, to have an understanding. Even Mimamsa. I mean, the beginning of Gita, this chapter 2, Krishna has like 10 verses, dissing. He's dissing Vedantic ritualism, saying the fools, they're attracted to rituals, they're addicted to power and knowledge. So you won't catch that reference. You'll miss 10 verses of the Gita and not have a clue what he's talking about unless you know something about Mimamsa. So it will really help you, if you do all of these 6 schools, you'll be able to catch a lot of references that otherwise we might go over your head. So he's debating. And then the wife of, and he's celibate. He's a Naishtika brahmachari. Naishtika means you've never had any sexual liaison with anybody. Naishtika. And so he doesn't know anything about sexual. And Mandana's wife, of course, they're married. They're grihastas. So she wants to win. So she's a bit tricky. So she asks him a question about some sexual question, and he doesn't know the answer. So he's going to lose the debate. So then he leaves his body by this city that we just saw, enters the body of a king who's dying, reanimates it, and has, the king has his harem. So then in the king's body, he gets to sample and taste all sexual pleasure. And then he comes back to Shankara's body with the answer. And so they, what was it? Oh, they were going to burn his body thinking he was dead. I can't remember if it was the king's body that was going to get burned or Shankara's body. Maybe it was Shankara's body, and he just got back in time. So during that period when he was away, the body was just like a rigor yogis. So these are all cool stories. They illustrate. You remember, most Indians get their yogic philosophy from stories, and they're so much fun, and you can still get your knowledge. So anyway, so you can leave the body, mahavideha, without the body, right? And it's a vritti, which means it's a subtle body, but it's akalpita. It's not imagined. We have kalpita vrittis. We have out of the body experiences which are kalpita. See the words kalpita. They're imagined. This is not imagined. It's actually leaving the body. And tataha prakashavaran. And then the from this kind of city, the covering of buddhi is destroyed, right? So buddhi is sattva, but there's still rajas and tamas. So somehow or other, again, this is the kind of verse that the commentators don't say very much about. They don't really analyze the metaphysics underpinning it, which again suggests to me that they're not interested particularly in mystic powers because Patanjali isn't. Now you get mastery of Bhuta Jayaha, right? Those of you that know your Sankhya charts, the last 5 are the Maha, the great Bhutas, right? Earth, water, fire, air and ether. We can think of it maybe as solids, liquids, gases, energies, and ether, whatever. We don't accept it anymore, but maybe, as I say, maybe it'll make a comeback. Maybe they'll realize there has to be some other kind of, I don't know. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But so Sankhya does. So the last five are the Mahabhutas. So mastery over the bhutas, samyad from samyama, on various aspects of external reality. I don't really want to get into this. Stula, Svarupa, Sukshma. They take the stula to be, taste. The stula means gross. So the gross aspect, what do we see? When you look out the window, when you get out of bed, we experience form, smell, taste, right? We know there's a world out there because we see it, we taste it, we touch it, we hear it, we smell it. So that's the stula, that's the gross aspect of Prakriti, are these qualities. Our senses perceive qualities. Qualities are grounded in substances, but we don't perceive the substances. We don't perceive the subatomic entities. Actually, it's one of the mysteries of physics, actually, is how do your elemental table, how do these elements produce qualities like taste, form, etc.? As to my knowledge, that's still something that hasn't been figured out. How do we go from subatomic entities and then atomic entities? How do they end up being qualities that are perceived by our senses? And that's something that's, to my knowledge, and I'm not a physicist, so I stand to be corrected, but as I recall in discussions with my colleagues from the philosophy department, I'm in the religion department, even though I do Hindu philosophy, that gets, at least in Rutgers, it's in the religion department. That's a mystery. So that's the stula. And the svarupa are things like a liquid has, I'm going to read this because so what are the sukshma means subtle. So subtle means liquidity, form, liquidity, heat, movement, and all pervadingness, like ether. So so that gross so we have the objects of the senses, and then we have these other qualities. Just to think of them as subtler qualities, and they like form, form and so forth. It doesn't really matter the detail. It's in my commentary, and I just, this is one of the commentary. I just copied the commentators. I just sort of represented what they had to say. So these are aspects of the external world, okay? They're just different aspects. There's form, taste, touch, there's all pervasiveness, liquidity, movement, all of this. So that's the svarupa and the stula. Okay, the sukshma is taken to mean, and it means subtle, actually. So what did I write about this? It's been 10 years now. When was this published? Long time ago. They're the subtle elements, but not localized. So sound, form, but not localized in substances, but all more cosmic. So the stula are localized. These qualities like sound, form, taste, localized, but sukshma is more their cosmic aspect. The tanmatras, they're on your Sankhya chart. And the artavat and the artavat is the anvaya are the gunas themselves. Okay, so what is ultimately reality out there? Well, we perceive the gross aspects, which are densification of subtler aspects, which are densification of cosmic subtler aspects, which are all densification of the gunas. That's all we need to know about this. External reality is a progression from sattva to tamas. Buddhi is the first evolute sattvic, and then it gets more and more, the sattva becomes less and less, and tamas becomes more and more. Of course, rajas is the instigator. It's that which sort of makes it all happen. It stirs it all up. And what's the artha? What's the purpose of Prakriti? Remember Patanjali in 218? Bhogapavarga Artha. Why is it there? Why is there a Prakriti in the first place? Right? People ask, why is there something and not nothing? Why are we here? Well, this question is asking, why is Prakriti there? Not we, not the Atman. That's a different kind of problem, different kind of question. But why is Prakriti there? And then we refer back to two, uses the same word in 218. Bhoga apavarga. Bhoga means you want to try to enjoy your senses. Bhoga. Then Prakriti offers you a variety of smells, tastes, sounds, sights, and textures and feelings. So sex, for example, would be touch, and music would be sound. So these are the 5 objects of the senses, and that's bhoga. When we are in avidya, in ignorance, ignorance means we think with body, mind, right? Avidya, right? To think that which is eternal and blissful, to be, to the non-eternal, non-blissful, to think that to be the ultimate self. Patanjali defines it. Avidya. Anyway, when we're in ignorance, we think we're body-mind. So if you think you're body-mind, you're going to seek pleasure through body-mind. So the body is designed to sort of has senses, which are designed to interact with sense objects. So you seek pleasure with the sense objects. And your mind is more subtle, and it's the emotions, and then there's intelligence, so intellectuality. So we try to find pleasure through emotionality, through intellectuality. Some people, take pleasure in reading philosophy or whatever it might be, intellectual pursuits, emotional pursuits, aesthetic pursuits. These are the objects of these are and the central pursuits, right? So the body is designed to accommodate that. So the senses allow sensual engagement. The subtle body allows emotional experiences. The intellectual body, buddhi, allows intellectual experiences. You can never, and that's bhoga. Bhoga is when you try to find happiness through those sheaths, to use the Upanishadic language, through the gross and subtle body, the stula and the sukshma. When we attempt to do that, it's bhoga. When we realize, I think the most important statement in the Yoga Sutra, at least for the beginning of the yogic journey, and it's the first noble truth of Buddhism, sarvam dukkam, 2 words, that all of that is frustrating. None of that gives us the bliss we seek. None of that gives us sensual enjoyment, emotional enjoyment. It's unfulfilling. It's temporary. It's ever changing. Your sensual experiences don't last. Your emotional experiences, they don't last. They can be taken, you can lose them in a second. Your intellectual experiences are, you constantly, they don't satisfy deeply, not for very long. When you realize that, sarvam dukkam, that's frustrating, then Prakriti gives the opportunity, right? This is all connected to this verse. What's the purpose of it? Artha, right? Let's look at it again. Arthatvat. All right, ultimately, so the Prakriti is gross. It has a gross form, a subtle form, even more subtle form than the gunas themselves. There's 5 things on this list, and finally, this is not artha. What's its purpose? These other 4 are actual metaphysical reals. Reality consists of real things. So let's call those real things reals. So that so subatomic particles are reals. Qualities are reals. So real means something that's really out there. But then, what's the purpose of it? It's not a real. That's kind of like, I don't know what you'd call that. What he called in Sanskrit, it's artavat. Why? The why. The why. Why is Prakriti there? Bhoga apavarga. So bhoga is when we use our instruments, sensual, mental, cognitive, to find happiness. Then Prakriti is there to provide objects, and that's bhoga. Sensual objects, emotional objects. We try to fall in love. We want to find a partner. All this nonsense about soulmates, right? Soul doesn't. The only soulmate is Bhagavan, my friends. And then when we realize that that's a failing proposition, I may take many, many lives running around, sampling this, sampling that, sampling this, different bodies. You want to fly, you can become a bird. When we realize that's all just fail, and it's something deeply missing, then Prakriti gives us the other option, which is apavarga, bhoga apavarga, liberation. This because the same mind seeks liberation. The same senses, we put them into, when we put our body into a yoga asana to sit and meditate. Well, that's the senses are doing that. The mind is directing that. So Prakriti is there for bhoga or apavarga. That's its purpose. Now, why we ended up in Prakriti in the first place, that's a separate kind of question. A different kind of question, which is not the topic of this verse. Okay? So therefore he's saying, if you do your samyama on these aspects of Prakriti, you get control over he brings it down to a Monday, you get control over the bhutas, the elements. Again, this is mystic power. You can do anything you want. You can control the matter in any way you want. Your buddhi, again, the same thing, can rearrange, can penetrate the substructure, like heat can penetrate ice and make it melt, change its form, change its constitution from solid to liquid, from cold to hot. So one entity can pervade another entity. A subtler entity can pervade a grosser entity and rearrange its constitution, right? And fire is the best example that comes to me right now. Fire can penetrate ice and change its constitution. It goes from solid to liquid. It goes from cold to hot. So a subtler thing can pervade a grosser thing. So mind can pervade everything and rearrange its constitution. And it's not magic. And anybody you see doing this, and there may be yogis that can actually do this, and they can produce ash or something. Don't touch them with a 10-foot barge pole. They shouldn't be. They don't touch them with a 10-foot barge pole, as we say in Britland. Nobody should be. If they have that city and they're displaying it, they're ripping you off. They're just trying to make money, or they're just trying to collect. I won't name any names, but there's some very, very well-known gurus in India that, especially merchants, have their picture up on the wall because they're hoping that the guru will give some power and they'll get money. So just see the mentality. And Patanjali says all these cities for those whose minds are outwardly going. All right, so therefore you have, but this verse is saying, yeah, sure, you have control over the bhutas. Okay, Bhuta Jaya, right? Jai, Jai, Jai Ram, Jai Sita Ram. You have victory, right? Jai means victory over the bhutas. The bhutas are the mahabhutas. On we go, my friends, and we will keep going, and then we'll start. Okay, then you get the 5. These are the classical 8 mystic powers that are referred to all over the place. And it just says Anima Adi, because it's such a well-known list. You just have to mention the first one and then put etc. Everybody knows it. Okay? Tato Anima Adi Pradurbhava. There's the manifestation of the classical 8 mystic powers. He's been talking about mystic powers, over the last 20 verses, but actually there is a kind of a classical list of 8. And they're usually referred to as anima, becoming smaller than the smallest, etc. And everybody knows what that is a reference to. Like we may say, sometimes there's a list, you don't have to say the whole list. If you say knives and forks, etc., that means, knives and forks and plates and spoons. Or, but I mean, so, we do that, we do that in tables and chairs, etc. So you just name one, and then the people know what the rest of the list is, because just by dint of common usage. We'll list them in a minute, right? And the body attains perfection. Okay, tad dharma anabhigatas cha. Obstacles are removed. No limitations. So he's got tad dharma. Oh, I'm curious here. Give me a second. The dharma of the body, it doesn't impede anything. The dharma anabhiga, there's no limitation because of the nature of the body. The body attains perfection. Okay, right. What is the classical list of the 8 cities? Anima, minuteness. You can shrink down and actually, when they talk about walking through walls, I mean, that could happen. I don't know. Either you can transform your body into the sort of air element and just penetrate it because you're more subtle. Maybe that's one way of doing it. But this, when it talks about anima, you become smaller than the smallest. So you can actually go between the gaps of the subatomic particles and go through a wall. There may be different ways of doing it, but anima, which is on the list, why not? I was thinking about, when I was reading through this afternoon, think about Big Bang. All this entire universe that we perceive was 14 billion years ago, compressed into a minuscule infinitesimal point of infinite density. So we know, if we accept Big Bang, which is an inference, by the way, but if we accept that inference, we accept that all this Prakriti, the gross Prakriti, actually could potentially, was once, and which means potentially could again, right, be reduced to a infinitesimally tiny point. So if we know that to be true, then yoga is saying, this verse is saying, well, yogis can do that. They can become smaller than the smallest. So it's up to you to decide whether you feel it's certainly not, again, philosophically impossible. When philosophers use the term philosophical possibility, a philosophical impossibility is 1 + 1 = 3. That's an impossibility. Or a round square. That's a philosophical contradiction in categories and terms. But, that there could be other celestial dimensions. It's not a philosophical impossibility. I mean, it may be true or not, but it's not impossible philosophically. There's no logical reason why that couldn't be the case. You could say, well, maybe it's the case, but we don't perceive it, so we don't accept it. That's fine. But there's no logical contradiction. So yogis can become smaller than the smallest, take it or leave it. The second one, lightness, lighter as light. We had that previously. So you can walk on water. We're all familiar with someone who did that. Depends on your belief system, Son of God, Jesus Christ, God made man, or a great rishi, according to the Indian way of thinking, a great yogi. Mahima, the opposite, can become bigger than the biggest. And make your body as heavy as, just increase the tamasic potential through your mind. If you can increase the sattvic potential, you can increase the tana. Why would you want to do that? No yogis would want to do that, but it's available. Prakamya, these are the 8 cities, classical cities. The 4th one, he just says anima. Okay, what are we doing? We're doing verse number 45. Anima adi. Adi means etc. This word adi. Sanskritists, adi is the Sanskrit way. Eleonora and Alice, we're going to run into this. Adi means etc. I think we ran into it right at the beginning, chapter 2 or something, or 3. So in English, we have a list and we say etc. And in Sanskrit, you have the first member of the list, or, in English, we have the first member of the list, and then we have etc. And then in Sanskrit, you have the first member of the list, same thing, but instead of etc., you have this word adi, means beginning with. So beginning with, and then that means that there must be things following. Okay, so, and then number 4 is you can do freedom of will. You can, dive into the earth, say the commentator, just as you dive into water. You sattvicize your body. You make it. We can't dive into the earth because our bodies are tamasic. Well, how about if we transform the nature of the body into sattva, where you can dive into the earth? That's the example they give. I'm just telling you there. Oh, we missed that number 4. That was number 5, freedom of will. Number 4, prapti. You can attain anything you desire. One commentator says you can touch the moon with your fingertips. Nothing, no obstruction. They don't explain, you know, the mechanics of it, but they would, if you really thought about it, you could find a explanation for all of these that are consistent with Sankhya metaphysics. That's what we're trying to do. As long as we are studying yoga, we enter into the metaphysics of yoga. When we study another school, we enter into their metaphysics. That's how you teach. You enter into the system. It doesn't mean you accept it or reject it. You enter into it and you explain it from its own logic. Right? That's called phenomenology. That's how I teach. So when I'm teaching Sankhya, my guru was like that. When he's teaching Sankhya, he was a Sankhyan. When he was teaching Vedanta, he was a Advaita. Vedanta, he was an Advaitin. So you really try to present the logic and the coherence of the tradition. You honor it, and you don't project your own stuff at it. And then you step out, and you are what you are. He was a great he was a bhakta, and that, you know, but he could teach anything and convince you of anything. This is the Purva Paksha. You know, it's like a good lawyer. Don't they do that in law school? You argue one side, then you have to go and argue the other side. So that way you really understand the system. And then once you understand it, then your decision about where you're going to put your faith in this life is grounded in knowledge of what the alternatives are. That's the Indian way of doing intellectual business. You don't just, when you study the school doesn't just give you its point of view. It gives you all the other opposing points of view. They're called the Purva Pakshas. I know I'm repeating, but that's good to repeat. All the opposing points of view, and that way your view is the last man left standing. You show how the opposing points of view may be right in many things, but they may be defective in the particular thing you're debating. And you show what the defect is. And then you end up saying, our school does not have this defect. And that's called a Siddhanta. Okay, I'm going to stop now, my friends, and log straight back on, okay? So don't go away. I don't know what happens to you. I don't know if you can just sit there. You might be able to just sit there. Or whether you have to log back on. But it's now 1 hour and 8 minutes. So
we have to log back on.
You have to log back on. Thank you. Right then, my friends. So now we have 5 of these cities. Okay, smallness, lightness, heaviness, attain anything you want, freedom of will, and then Vashitva mastery. You can control the elements. I mean, they all sort of overlap. Okay, control anything you want. Your mind can control anything you want. It can penetrate any aspect of Prakriti. Ishitritva, Isha, Ishvara, you become like the Lord. The ability to control the outward appearance, disappearance, and rearrangement of the elements. You can do anything you want in the realm of Prakriti. How are you different from Ishvara then? We've had this discussion before, but I think it's really important to repeat it. The yogi can do anything, has total mastery within the universe. Rearrange any of the elements, do anything, complete and utter freedom of will within a universe, but cannot create the universe. And of course, in the Puranas, there are multiple universes. So Ishvara's power is supremely excels that of the accomplished Siddha. The Siddha's power is restrained within a universe. Cannot create the universe in the first place. What to speak of unlimited universe, which Vishnu does. Vishnu is reclining on Shesha. Who's Shesha? Our friend Patanjali, right? Abahu Purusha Akaram Shankha Chakra Asidharinam. That's Shesha. Vishnu's reclining on Shesha, and he's reclining from every pore of his body. The universes are emanating out like bubbles in a bath. Bubble bath. That's a terrible analogy. From every pore of the body, universes are emanating out. So in a minute, I'm going to, we're at 77% uploaded, and I don't want to, it just disappeared. It shut off my screen last time, and I couldn't find it. But eventually, I went into the Rutgers. So, okay, so that's the difference. Do you remember that Patanjali says that Ishvara's omniscience is unsurpassed? What does that mean? Omniscience should mean omniscience. Why do you say omniscience by definition means everything? How can omniscience be unsurpassed? Well, same thing. The yogi's omniscience is within a universe. Ishvara's omniscience is all multiple universes and the creation and the ability to know how to create the universe in the first place. So do you ever think about that verse? When the Ishvara verse is in Patanjali, Tasya sarvajna nirati shayam, his omniscience is unsurpassed. It seems to be a redundant thing to say. Omniscience by definition is unsurpassed. And you never say redundant things in sutra writing. Okay, my friends, I'm just going to take a moment here. We're 98%, and I do not want to lose this. I can't minimize, so that's the thing. Okay, let me just push this. Can I? Oh, where did it go? Oh, okay, wait. Don't go. I've got the video. How do I? So therefore, don't do in case there's any problem. Right, give me a second. I have to get this. Let me get rid of that. Let me get rid of this. Okay, good. We're good. Push that over to the desktop. Okay, my friends. Okay, so that's the difference between Ishvara and were we recording? We're recording, yes? Yes. Okay. So, but the number 7 on the list of 8 is this Ishitritva, the ability to be Ishvara, but only within the universe. Finally, Yatra Kama Vasayatva. You can they're basically repeating the same thing. You can do anything you want. Oh, we have to open it up again. Okay. Desktop share. Oops. Where did the Yoga Sutras go? Okay, I'm gonna have to open the Yoga Sutras up again, not a problem. So we go down to Yoga Sutras, full text. And we're going to scroll, and we're there. Okay, so then we do stop share, but then we have to do share again. I'm getting good at this. Okay, there we are. So, so there we have the anima adi. Okay, so you might want to make a note of that. It's a very standard kind of word, and it refers to the 8 lists. Right, 46. We're going to finish chapter 3, my friends. Rupa Lavanya Bala Vajra Samhanat. Let me read the Sanskrit. Samhananatvani Kaya Sampat. So, again, these are all they're very material. Now you can understand why Patanjali says they're of no interest. What do you get from that? Rupa, beauty. What the hell does the yogi want beauty for? What, you're going to the forest? You're going to check out the yoginis? I don't think so. You're brahmachari. So what do you want beauty for? Who wants beauty unless they're interested in material liaison? So beauty, charm, lavanya, bala, strength. Well, you don't. So all of these are material accomplishments. Vajra, the power of a thunderbolt. Vajra is the weapon of Indra. So here we are in the world of Indo-European. It's very interesting because Indra and Zeus and Thor, they are all rain gods, and they're all sort of the leader of the other celestials. This is old Indo-European, and they all have. Well, Thor has a hammer, Zeus has lightning, and Indra has a thunderbolt. So you can see it all comes from an ancient period before Sanskrit, before Greek, before all of any literature we have that remains in that is preserved. Before all of that, there was a period of unity, a linguistic unity anyway, and cultural unity, where we have this language that we don't know what we call it Indo-European. That's what we call it. We don't know what it was called. And there was a community of speakers, and they shared a culture. And Europe got obsessed with this in the late 19th, early 20th century, ended up with the whole Aryanism. And we all know what direction that took with, Aryanism versus, anti-Semiticism. Well, the direction that took in Nazi ideology. But, actually, it all came from the discovery of Sanskrit, the whole Aryan myth, and the Uber Heimat and the Uber Volk and the the Aryan people, all of that came from, and German Indology in the early part of the 20th century. You go online, type in Indo-European, it's all German. 80% of it's German. The French did a little bit, the Brits did a little bit more. Americans not very much. It's 60% is German. Maybe not 80, but masses of it, because it was all involved with national identity. Who were those original people? Who were those people who were the forefathers of the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, and then now they've discovered this amazing civilization in India? Who were if you could say you were the forefathers, that's a pretty good nationalistic shot in the arm. So nationalism, thrives on past greatness. You have to argue we've always been a great people. We have this great history, and now we must become great again, right? So the Aryan myth. But there was a language. Probably not just one language. It would have always had satellite dialects, and there was a pantheon. And you can even some of the bits of names are still existent, like Dios Pater and Zeus Pitra, Dios Pitra, Jupiter, Zeus. You can still see obviously the words change over millennia, but you can still see the linguistic origins of the language. You totally reconstruct it. But even the culture, you can glimpse at it, bits and pieces. And it was, celestial realms, sacrifice to the celestials in an attempt to win their favor. And of course, over the course of millennium, it gets devolved and it takes different shades. So, but even Vedic India, my friends, animals were offered in the sacrifice. Animals were offered in the Vedic sacrifice. There was a Brahmin, a poor little Shastri in Delhi University. He was just a professor, Sanskrit professor. And he wrote a book, Animal Sacrifice in the Rig Veda. And the right-wing Hindus went mad. They burnt the book, and the poor little guy, he was just translating he was just a Sanskritese. He wasn't interested in politics. But because he wrote a book saying how in the earliest culture, earliest Rig Vedic culture, you can't get away from it. It's written there. Animals were sacrificed, and the meat was divided, and the Brahmins ate it. Later, ahimsa emerges, and then substitutes are found, and the Brahmins become vegetarians in the middle Vedic period, but not in the early Vedic period. And he just wrote a book. Poor little guy had to go in hiding. So why did we say all that? Because of this common. So the thunderbolt, right? So that's this. Why are we talking about thunderbolts? Because it's in the sutra here, and sometimes we take these vrittis. And because why not? Because there's such a beautiful, rich culture that we can sometimes take these little detours, make things more interesting, perhaps. Right? That's the Vajra. It becomes important in Buddhism. So you just get these sort of physical things, beauty and the rest of it. Right. Now, we just had Sanyama on the external Prakriti, right? The gross form, the subtle form, the fact that they're made of the three. Now, the next verse is you do Sanyama on the instruments of perception. So you've got Grahana, that's what grasps. How do you grasp sound? How do you grasp smells? Your instruments of perception, that means your nose and your senses. My friends, I have to take one something at night, and I have to take it. I'll just be right back. I forgot about it. Give me 2 minutes. So the instruments of perception, have a look at the verse while I grab somewhere here. Okay. So, so the instruments of perception are the grahana, that which allows you to grasp. Right? And the process svarupa and the process of knowledge, the essence of the sense, the essence of the sense organs is sattva. So the essence of gross matter, tamas is very prominent in gross matter, but remember, the mind is prakriti. So the mind stuff is very sattvic. So that's the svarupa, and then the asmita, the ego, because something has to own. There has to be a sense that I am perceiving, I am thinking. There has to be an instrument. Otherwise, they'd just be there wouldn't be a sense of I-ness. Can you imagine not having a sense of I-ness? There would just be sensations and experiences, and you'd be mad. There would be no sense of an I that's underpinning those experiences. You couldn't function in the world. How would you do anything? There wouldn't be a you. You wouldn't have a sense of a you. So therefore, the Sankhya posits there must be a property that individualizes all of these things. There must be an instrument that claims them all under the jurisdiction of an I. And it's not the Atman. Atman is just consciousness. Atman is potentially like light. It's potentially universal. It doesn't have an ego. So there must be a property of the cognitive equipment that brings all of these sensations, it localizes them all into a center of gravity, well, not gravity, but a center of cognition. That's the asmita, and that's in this verse here. Right, and again, ultimately, the gunas underpin, just like the gunas underpin the external world, the gunas underpin the instruments of cognition, because your mind is prakriti. So the previous verse then was analyzing the gross world out there, from gross to subtle, and the subtlest of all is the gunas. This verse is analyzing not the world out there, but the instruments through which we perceive it. The senses, the ego, the intelligence, and ultimately sattva. Then the world out there becomes more and more tamasified. The internal world gets more and more sattvic the more we approach buddhi. Buddhi is the most sattvic of all. So this is just an analysis of now the instruments of cognition. And when you do samyama on that, and again, the artha, the same purpose, the last two are the same. Look, anvaya, artava, right? Anvaya are the gunas, and artava is what's the purpose. Let's go back to the world out there, right? The world out there. Here, it also has anvaya, artava. So the last two are the same. The anvaya are the three gunas. So the three gunas underpin the gross world out there and underpin the subtle instruments of cognition themselves through which we perceive the gross world out there. And the purpose, bhoga apavarga, we had that discussion, is the same. The purpose of the objects out there and the purpose of the instruments by which we perceive them is the same. You want to try and enjoy, you can use your instruments of cognition and the sense objects out there to try to enjoy, bhoga, or you can use the world out there, meaning your body as well, and your instruments of cognition to seek liberation. Either of those, bhoga, apavarga. Apavarga is another word for liberation. Okay? Is this all right? Is some of this making sense, my friends? Is it a little too technical? Who feels it's a bit technical but is hanging in there? Too technical, thumbs up. Technical? Ellen? Are you okay? Rhonda? Faustin, are we okay? We're getting it? Your boys are getting it? We're waiting for you in our Rutgers philosophy classes. Your boys there. We'll save a place for you. Okay, we doing okay, Eric? Therese? Yes? I know it's technical, but you get the whole point of it all is that the yogis can bypass karmic conditioning. and they can bypass their individualization and pervade substructure. If you just remember that, you understand the basic mechanics of all siddhis. That's it. Okay. And when are we going to get the famous verse? Do we have it already? It's no interest to the yogis. So then you have anima adi. Oh, we did that already. Right. And if, you know, then you get control of the senses. If you understand the nature of the organs of perception, you can control the senses. Even, right? Because you, Patanjali says, the higher vairagya is when you realize everything's just the gunas. When you realize everything is just the gunas, you approach Purusha, you lose interest in everything. So you control the senses. They no longer interest you because you're not satisfied with bhoga anymore. You're not satisfied with bhoga, with sense gratification, because it's temporary and it's tamasic and it doesn't fulfill. So by doing sanyama on the instruments of cognition and perception, you get it's very similar to the Vairagya verse. Remember the Vairagya verse? There was two parts to the Vairagya verse. There was, you lose interest in anything that has been heard, and then tat param guna vaitrishnya. Higher than that is disinterest in the gunas themselves. So when you understand what everything is, you realize really what's the ultimate. Where does all this take the yogi? The person that seeks liberation, all this information takes the yogi, makes the yogi understand, I am not any of that. So that cannot fulfill me. The world out there and the instruments of perception and the essential equipment, that is not me. If it is not me, that is not my goal. That is not my grand finale. That will never satisfy. It isn't me. It's a parasitic overlay. It's parasitic. What does a parasite do? It sucks something from a host entity. So the prakriti, the subtle body, is sucking consciousness. It's parasitic on consciousness and diverting it out there. And we're all frustrated and we're getting older and we haven't found. There's something missing. And that's, of course, consciousness itself. So therefore, by doing samyama on all of that, you realize all of this. You realize it, the mind realizes, and anyway, so then this verse says you get control over the senses. So let's move on. We want to finish the chapter. Not that we're going to rush, but there's no reason why we can't finish it. Here, not finally, actually. Sattva purushanyata khyati, when one matrasya, when one realizes the difference between the purusha and sattva. Sattva means intelligence. Another word for buddhi is sattva, because buddhi is made of sattva. So upon realizing the difference, sarva bhava adhishtatritvam, there is mastery over everything, all existence, sarva bhava. In other words, omnipotence. And sarva gnatritvam, and omniscience. The verse says. When you okay, but it's a strange verse, because if you realize the difference between purusha and the intellect, why would you not just forget about all the siddhis and just go the final step into nirbija? But there are yogis, they're not yogis, I don't know what you would call them. If the goal of yoga, remember, the goal of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha tada drashtu swarupe vastanam, that you do chitta vritti nirodha so that the purusha can experience itself. So those that do chitta vritti nirodha, but they're not interested in purusha, you can't call them yogis. You'd call them, meditators or whatever you want to call them. You'd have to come up with some other name. And there are those, and this verse suggests, they may realize that the purusha is different. Not interested. They want mastery over prakriti and omniscience. And the great demons, Ravana, they were amazing tapasvins. They did amazing, practices. We can't call it yoga because they weren't interested in Svarupa Vastanam. And they wanted power. And this, Ravana could control the whole universe. He was a demon. If you've read the Ramayana, the gods could not, the Devas could not, normally the Devas are battling the Asuras. They could not defeat him. He had become omniscient, just like this verse said. Ravana, the anti-hero of the Ramayana. He had Bhav Adishtatritvam and Sarvagnatritvam. He had knowledge over everything and supremacy over everything. Remember, within the universe. So for one who discerns the difference between the Purusha intellect, do omniscience and omnipotence accrue. I don't know if Ravana knew of that difference, but he had that power. And he was a demon. So these mystic powers are of no interest. Which verse was that? 3 something? Let's just revisit that before we continue, my friends. We've only got 6 more verses. Does anyone remember?
337.
Pardon?
337.
Yeah, really, if there's one verse that I would hope you all take with you, it's 337. Here it is, my friends. Look, don't be afraid of the Sanskrit. They, samadho, in samadhi, right? Sanskritis. What is the locative of samadhi, of the e ending nouns? Au. Remember, gati gatao, or hari harao. So what happens when au meets a verb, a vowel? It becomes av. So they, in samadhi, upasarga, obstacles. So why are they called cities? Siddhaya vyuttane. They're cities for those whose minds are outward going. Outward means that the mind's going out to the world. They still want something out there, but they want it in some superhuman, even omniscient sort of way, but they want the world out there. What's real yoga? Internal, antaranga, svarupa. You block out the world out there. You do pratyahara, and then you do the world out there. You pratyahara the world out there. That's only the 5th limb of yoga. And then you go in and you nirodha the internal world. You block even the internal world. That's chittavritti nirodha. And then svarupa. You want your internal. So it's the opposite. If you seek siddhis and you seek powers and you seek enjoyment. So please take that away from this chapter. I mean, it's, if it has any value, and I remember reading, like the autobiography of a yogi. He's got lots of this cool, this mystic power. And it really turned a lot of people in the counterculture towards Indian spirituality. So it has that value. If you can show there's something beyond the gross body, you're kind of heading in the right direction. Even if you talk about subtle bodies and flying through the air and walking on water, it kind of at least opens the door. As much of the, much countercultural experience did. A lot of us had our start in the counterculture. That was that moment when the big gurus came from India in the 60s. There was just this kind of combination, perhaps by the grace of Bhagavan, where on the one hand, the 60s, the Western society underwent this kind of countercultural moment. And, everybody was experimenting with drugs and, breaking down social norms. And just at that moment, you had these great gurus, Bhaktivedanta Swami of the Hare Krishnas, Muktananda of Siddha Yoga, Guruji Iyengar, Shivananda of the Vishnu Devananda of the Shivananda Society, Satchidananda. They all came over at that moment. They didn't know there was a counterculture going on. In the beginning, they didn't know that. So they had this combination of this sort of, and Brahmins are not supposed to leave India. You're not supposed to cross the ocean. An Orthodox Brahmin, I bet you Krishnamurti would never have done it. I mean, not Krishnamurti, Krishnamacharya. Krishnamurti did. Krishnamacharya wouldn't have. He was more off. I don't know, but I'm guessing. Not supposed to cross the ocean, go to the land of the meat eaters. No. You lose your status as a Brahmana. So you take risks to do that. Even in the 60s, there's still. So you had this sort of moment of you have this combination of these two, and as a result of which, here we are in the West studying the Yoga Sutras, quite seriously studying it. So what do you want to call that? Is that fate? Is that destiny? Is that karma? Is it an arrangement of Bhagavan? Who can say? Who can answer that question? But anyway, why are we saying all that? Because because the cities, that was the autobiography of a yogi was a classic, and it opened up a lot of people to Indian spirituality. So they all had their, the cities have their cool factor. They have their Lower East End of New York City cool factor, but they're of no interest for when one progresses into, more, really, if you're really seeking Bhagavan or you're really seeking the Atma, and those are two different things, then they are upasargas, this verse says. They are obstacles, my friend. So please memorize this. Te samadhav upasargaha. Obstacles. Vyutane siddhayaha. They're only cities for vyutane, in one whose mind is outward going. Outward going means what? I can find my happiness out there in the world of Prakriti. What does the yogi understand? No, there's no happiness out there. At least there's no permanent, eternal bliss that I seek. There's only temporary sukha, which is soon replaced by dukkha, and then sukha, and then dukkha, and then sukha and parinama, and ever-changing, up and down, up and down. Right then. Kevalya. Okay, so the last verse says, you become omniscient and omnipotent. And this is just like the one we just read, 337. Tad vairagyad. When you give even that up, you got to give that up. Give what up? Omniscience and omnipotent, my friends. I wouldn't give it up. If I had the city of omnipotence and omniscience, I'd probably waste a few lifetimes checking it out before I climb back on the yogic path. Fortunately, Krishna says at the end of chapter 6, he said, well, even if you fall off the path, you come back. But if all of a sudden this city manifest, I'm sure I'd go flying about the sky for a bit and walking on water and doing cool stuff, and probably get lost for a couple of lifetimes. What do you think, Dushyant? Check it out, right? Because Krishna promises you get back up, you get frustrated sooner or later, so you get back. But anyway, Vairagya. And can we just go back a little bit, my friends? Let's remind ourselves.
Taste of everything, right?
Yeah, let's remind ourselves of a verse number. Let's compare that verse. Sorry, get rid of that. I always have trouble getting this bar. Just scroll up. I want to make connections within the sutras, because actually the first 5 sutras get repeated. Now we just got up to the Vairagya verse. Okay, we go up here and have a quick look at this Vairagya, right? So he's talking about Nirodha. It's Abhyasa Vairagya Abhyam, right? And then he's got Abhyasa. What's Abhyasa? These are really important. Tatra stito yatna, the effort to keep the mind still. That's Abhyasa. Okie doke. What about a dirgha kala nirantarya, long time, no interruption, satkara, with respect. Right. Now, what's Vairagya? Vashikara samya, the controlled mind, vitrishnasya, of one who is without thirst, drishta anushravika vishaya, for any sense object. So Vairagya is, you lose your thirst for sense objects, right? Tasty food, you want to go beyond that. You want to just go beyond sensual experience and seek higher truths. And then he goes, tat param. So the regular Vairagya is vishaya, sense objects, drishta anushravika, whether you've experienced them or you've heard about them, but vitrishnasya, you lose your thirst for these vishaya. Vishaya is the sense objects. Bhoga, it's another word for bhoga, is vishaya. So that's Vairagya, but tat param, higher than that, is guna vaitrishnam. You lose your interest in anything made of the gunas. You don't want nothing, not omnipotence, not omniscience, none of it. Purusha kyatir, when you start to approach Purusha. So this verse is very much in the spirit and sort of echoing, or this verse in 250, whatever we just read, is echoing that. Oh, we're in chapter 3. Okay, so, and what was the verse? It was, there it is. Okay. Tad Vairagyad. When you get Vairagya, even that. Okay, so we made a connection with Vairagya. What is Vairagya? Abhyasa Vairagya Abhyam Tandirodaha. Nirodha is Abhyasa Vairagya. And when you give up even this, omniscience, omnipotence, Api dosha bije, right? Then all doshas, all faults. What is the fault of omnipotence? Well, you desire to enjoy, but still raga. You want to enjoy in a super normal way. Well, it's still a raga. And you still think you're the body, you're still associating with your subtle body. Even if you leave your gross body, you're still doing it in a subtle body. So it's still a kind of asmita. It's just a sukshma asmita, it's a subtle asmita, it's still an asmita. What are you walking on water with? Your subtle body. What are you flying through the air with? Your subtle body, your buddhi, your entire. You're still trapped by your buddhi, because all these mystic powers are emanating from buddhi. So you're asmita. And remember the other verse? Let's have a look at the other verse. Come on, my friends. Let's make these connections. This is Svadhyaya. We want to make these connections. Now, do you remember the verse when he talks about some yogis get stranded? I think it's right before. Does anyone, the Ishvara verses, or right after? Tivra Samvegana. It's near. Preceded by all of that. Here, 119. For some, those who are unembodied, bhava pratyaya, those who are merged in matter, the state of samprajnata, by absorption in states of prakriti. Here, he talks about the prakriti layanam. You can merge into prakriti, videha, or be without body, but you're still bhava pratyaya. You're trapped in matter. He gives here, verse 119, right at the beginning. Right? This kind of, from intense concentration, you can merge, you can leave your body, your subtle body, which is just what we've been talking about all through chapter 3. Your subtle body can merge into prakriti layanam. Let me pronounce it properly. Prakriti layanam. To be merged into prakriti, or bodiless, meaning without a gross body. But your bhava pratyaya, you're still trapped in matter. Your mind is still trapped in matter, right? So this is kind of like, basically, like some of the siddhas from the yoga point of view. Pay attention to 119. Go back and read that commentary, and you'll see overlap with the entire chapter 3 already there in the beginning in verse 19. Okay, so forgive me for making these connections, but I think they're important. The more you study, the more you make these connections. Then what? I don't know. You won't get moksha, but it just makes your study richer, my friends. And we got to do something with our minds. So why can't I ever get this? There we are. We have trouble with it. I'm sure I've been told many times what to do, and I just get scatterbrained. You have to forgive me for being scatterbrained, my friends. Aren't we allowed to be absent-minded professors? Isn't that part of the job description? Right then. So, Dadvairagya, when you give up even that, api, even that. Api means even. Dadvairagyad api, right, Alice? Right, Sanskritis? Api, even, when you give up even that, even what? Omniscience and omnipotence. Then the dosha bija, there is the destruction of the seeds of all faults. Because if you want to be omnipotent and omniscient, you have a raga, and that is a klesha, and a klesha is a dosha. Same thing. Klesha, dosha, same thing. Some of you know Ayurveda. Dosha is used in a different way there, but it's still, an imperfection of the body, a fault, a flaw in the body that, in your health, right? That in Ayurveda. So it's used here as a klesha. So when you give up even the desire for omnipotence and omniscience, then you give up the destruction of all the seeds of all faults. Kevalyam. Kevalyam. Kevalyam means liberation. It really means aloneness, which sounds awful. So let's use another term, autonomy. Consciousness has been trapped. It's become subjected to Prakriti. We like words like autonomy and independence and throwing off the shackles of servitude. We like those kinds of words. So let's use those words then. Kaivalya means Kevala means only. So now it's only consciousness, as opposed to consciousness mixed in with something else. Well, then it's not only, is it? If consciousness is absorbed in the vrittis in the world, well, it's not only consciousness. It's consciousness plus the mind and the objects of the senses and everything that's out there. So you can't say only anymore. It's not pure. Why do we use the language of pure consciousness? Pure is when it's not mixed. If you want pure milk, like say you go to India and you want pure milk, you better stand right next to the cow and they're milking it. Otherwise, they can mix water in with it. Or pure gold. How do you know it's pure gold? You don't know. They can stamp it with anything. So pure is when it's not. What's the definition of pure? Not mixed with anything. So this was another word that came over in the 60s counterculture, pure consciousness. I don't know if you use it in Sanskrit, Shuddha Chetana. I can't think of it being used. I may be wrong. I'm just off the top of my head right now. Patanjali says Svarupa, its own nature. But does the word pure should? Maybe it does. I can't think right now. So okay, so consciousness. So pure means only that. Kevalya means only, onlyness. It's still a word in Bengali. Kevala. Still used in Bengali is out of all the North Indian or all the Sanskrit derived languages, by the way, Bengali is the closest to Sanskrit. Those of us doing Sanskrit are doing the 10 ganas. Well, Bengali has these different ganas. It has these different categories of verb dhatus. So it's actually much closer to Sanskrit than Hindi or these other languages. Right, 51. This is a strange verse. It's kind of an interesting verse. Apparently, celestial beings can approach the yogi. And there's stories, and the Patanjali is saying, don't get smug. So it's kind of giving a warning. The same, he's giving a warning about the cities, saying these are only, accomplishments for those whose minds are interested, outward going, still interested in the outside of consciousness, the objects of consciousness, not interested in consciousness itself. Then he has this interesting warning. And, the Deva, some Deva, and I know Indra, Indra, the Lord of the Devas, he's if you become one of these yogis that is omnipotent, you can challenge the Devas. Ravana did. There's an example right there. So Ravana was a bad guy, and Indra couldn't defeat him. So if you get these siddhis, the Devas may try to deviate you from your path. So something like that. So they approach the yogi. Patanjali, not necessarily in all cases, but there are, look, if solicited by celestial beings, the yogi should not become smug because the tendency towards undesirable consequences can once again manifest. If you become smug and think, I'm such a great yogi, even the devas are coming to do namaha to me. Even the celestial beings are coming down. Look how great a yogi I am. Then immediately, of course, you've become overcome by the kleshas. It's kind of strange. He stuck it in there. And, if something's in a sutra, my friends, there's a reason for it.
Devas come with you.
We don't know who the communication partners 2,000 years ago were. He's obviously dealing with things that are relevant on his landscape. So this must have been something that was out there, that you don't put something in the sutra unless it's relevant. Listen, there's only 1,200 words in the Yoga Sutras. 1,200 words. That's like 2 pages, 12 font, double spaced. The actual sutras. You don't put something in a sutra unless it's really needs to be there. So why this whole discussion on cities? Because and even today, people practicing, these concentrative activities to get powers. And so there must have been this thing out there that, that the devas approach the yogis. He wouldn't have put it in unless it was something that he felt was relevant, and he's warning. It's a warning. He's saying, don't get smug if the devas approach you. So clearly he believed the devas could, Patanjali put it in there, which means that idea was circulating. Maybe it's a real thing. Maybe it's a reality. We can't say it's not. We can't say there are no devas. Who can say that? You can say you believe or you don't believe. You can say your Hubble bubble telescopes can't see them. You can say that, but you can't say they don't exist just because you don't see them. That would fail 101 logic. That would. Something doesn't exist. Try arguing that in a logic class. Something doesn't exist because I don't see it. It's taken up right at the beginning of the Sankhya Sutras. Right at the beginning of the Sankhya Sutras, it says, because the opposing point of view says, I can't see the Atman, therefore it doesn't exist. Remember, the opposing point of view, Indian philosophy always engages the opposing point of view. And Sankhya says, you may not see things for many reasons. It may be too far, maybe too near, maybe blocked by an obstacle, it may be too subtle. And it gives a list of reasons why things that exist are not perceivable. Things we know exist, but we can't perceive them. And he gives you a reason of why that could be the case. And he says, the fact that we don't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And he gives this list. So you could take the same position about the devas if you wished. We don't see them, but you can't then just say they don't exist. Or you can just say, I don't believe they exist. And that's fair enough, as long as you qualify it that way. So anyway, the yogi may be, right, the Sanskrit. So sthani upani mantrane sangasmaya karanam punar anishta prasangat. Don't get smug. Now, Shanatat krama yoho samyamad. All this is samyamad. If you do sanyama on the moment and its sequence, viveka jam jnanam born of discrimination. We've had viveka in the second chapter, the vivekin in 218. Vivekin, the one who has viveka, sarvam dukkam, he knows, he thinks everything is suffering. Every boga, all boga is unfulfilling. And then what do you get from the 8 limbs of yoga? Yoga, right, 228. Why do you do the 8 limbs? Yog anga anushtanad, right before the discussion of the 8 limbs. Ashudikshaye, jnana, deeper, aviveka. You get viveka. So this word viveka has occurred several times. Now, you get viveka from understanding the moment and its sequence. A kshana is the smallest instance of time in Indian metaphysics. What is the largest unit of time is the entire creative cycle. The creation is cyclical. It's called a kalpa. It's whatever it is, 14 billion years. So we talk about the 4 yugas, right? The 4 ages. So 4 of those are, it's written differently in different Puranas. 4 of those are a kalpa. And right, so that's 4 million, it's been so long since I looked at this. So 420,000 times 10, 4,020,000, 200,000, and then a number of kalpas make up the entire one whole cycle. I can't remember the number, but it's something like 14 billion. Right, that's the largest unit of time. Largest unit of time is the beginning of a creative cycle until it all dissolves back into latent gunas. And then there's a period of latency, then it all starts again. We've all heard of cyclical creativity. That's the largest unit of time. What's the smallest unit of time? The time it takes a subatomic particle, because everything's in motion, the time it takes a subatomic particle to move from its location to the immediately adjacent location. That's the definition of the smallest unit of time in Indian metaphysics. So you have subatomic particles, whatever they end up being, right? Subatomic particles, when it moves from its minuscule location, because it's subatomic, imagine how small it is, to the immediately adjacent space, so that unit of time it takes to do that is the smallest unit of time in Indian metaphysics. So this verse is saying, when you do sanyama on the moment and its sequence, so what does it mean, the sequence of moment? What is a sequence? What's moving? The subatomic particle. Time is nothing other than movement. It's not some separate thing. There's gunas. There's nothing separate. So therefore, when the gunas densify into the mahabhutas, into the subatomic particles, right, the last 5 things on your list, those subatomic they were called atoms when these texts were first translated, but at that time was Newtonian physics, when they thought the atom was the smallest irreducible entity. So when they were translating the Sankhya texts, it would have been the end of the 19th century. They hadn't discovered, electrons and protons, and neutrons. Well, I don't know when they discovered those, but it was Newtonian physics. Whenever that was, I don't know the history of the science, but these texts, which I guess they were translated, the 19th century, maybe some of them at the end of the 18th century, some of them were, beginning to be translated. But anyway, whenever it was, at that time, the atom was considered to be the smallest unit. So when they encountered the Sanskrit term anu, they translated it as atom. And by the way, in Greek, atom means an irreducible entity. You can't reduce it anymore. Stop sign. So that's what an anu is. You can't reduce it. At least in Sankhya you can. And let's not get too sidetracked. So that's we can't call it atom anymore because we know there's electrons and protons. So an atom is reducible. It's reducible to electrons and protons and neutrons, and it turns out those are also reducible. And now we're talking about muons and gluons, and God knows where that's all going to end. Buddhists are going to say, you go on forever. You never reach an irreducible entity. Everything is, if you take your muon and gluon, they would say, does it have a north, a south, a western and east? For it to be spatial, it must have north, south, the way they frame it, north, south, west, and east. Well, then separate the north from the south and west, and now you've got a smaller entity. Is that an entity? Well, if it's an entity, it must have a north and north, south, west, and you can keep on reducing. Buddhism would say you would never. There are no irreducible particles, because if there was an irreducible particle, it would always be the same. It would always be the same, and therefore it would have an essence. And there are no essences in Buddhism. But that's a story for another day. The Bose particle, yeah. So, what is the verse saying? The sutra saying? But somehow or other, if you do sanyama on that, you get viveka. I don't really understand this verse, because viveka, earlier in the text, it's associated with, viveka means to understand the difference between prakriti and purusha. That's how it's pitched in 228. So why here he's saying jnanam vivekajam, knowledge born of discrimination comes from samyama on the movement of time? Don't ask me. Maybe because, if I had to guess, it would be to realize that consciousness is unmoving, achala, and everything in prakriti is moving on the subatomic level. So that's how that would be my interpretation, but I don't remember the commentators saying anything that I can't remember if I wrote anything on this. We're almost done, my friends. Hang in there. 3 more verses. Let me just have a quick peek at the commentaries here. It's been such a long time. Yeah, they don't, oh no. So yeah, you just get knowledge. I guess you realize you know everything about past and if you understand past atomic, if you understand movement of subatomic entities, you understand how they got to be where they are at that moment. Yeah, there's a whole discussion now. Sorry, I take it back. There's a whole discussion here about there's no real past and there's no real future, because the past has become the present and the future doesn't exist. So by doing sanyama on the moment, you know the past, because you know by your omnipotence, by knowing every single subatomic entity, you know where it came from and how it came to be the present, and you know how it will become the future. So that's omniscience. So they talk about omniscience being understanding every subatomic entity in the now, because understanding it in the now, you understand what it was and what it will become. And again, it's Newtonian physics. If you really knew the location of every subatomic particle and the nature of every force bearing upon the subatomic particles, you would know where they would be in a minute's time, in 10 minutes' time, in a year's time, and for all time. And then there's this curious verse. As a result of this kind of knowledge of the moment, remember the moment is, if you know the moment, you know the subatomic substructure of everything, because the moment is the time is the movement of subatomic particles to the smallest unit is movement of movement of atom subatomic particle to the immediately adjacent space. So all time is movement. If you understand that, you know where that movement came from, and you know where those movements will end up. Okay, I only got 2 more verses, my friends. I'm sorry if we're over time, but not badly so. So quickly then, you can identify 2 comparable things that are not distinguishable by species, characteristic, or location. Okay, so species would be 2 cows. Okay, so they have 2 cows, so they're the same, but the characteristics may be different. So one may be a black and white cow, but one may be a black cow. And the location may be different. One cow may be in that field. I'm giving the example of the commentators. They give the example of the cow. And then the other cow is in another field. So you can tell the difference. So that species may be the same. Maybe the species and the characteristics are the same, but the location would be different. Okay, so they say, but the yogi can know the difference. And here's the example they give. You get 2 apples. They're identical. The species are the same, the characteristics are the same, but they can't be in the same location, because they can't be in the same location. So they say, if the yogi's not looking, right, and there's an apple on the table, and you trick the yogi, you come up, and the yogi's not looking, you take the apple away, you put an identical apple in the same location. So now you have, apple is the same species, characteristics are the same. Granny Smith, green, identical. You can't have all 3 things in the same, you can have 2 of those 3 things. You can't have all 3 normally. You can't have 2 cows in the same location. They have to be next to each other, right? Even if they have the same species and the same characteristics. So they come up with this thought experiment. It's basically a yogic thought experiment. Vyas says, what if someone, he's trying to explain this verse, what I just said, 2 apples, same species, same characteristic, they're not in the same location, so the apple's sitting there, and the yogi goes off, I don't know, for a minute, and he's not looking, he doesn't know you're doing this, and you take that apple and put the other one there, so now they're identical apples in the same location, so the yogis would instantly know, because the yogi would understand the substructure of that apple is different from the substructure of the other apple. This is just another way of talking about omniscience. Omniscience, it goes down to the subatomic level. Take it or leave it, my friends. This is chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras. We're just reading it. I think it's kind of far out. Right, that's 53. And 2 more verses. And tarakam sarva vishayam sarvata vishayam akramam cheti vivekajam. And it's a liberator, this knowledge born of discrimination. What's ultimate discrimination is to discriminate not between one atom and another atom. Ultimate highest form The highest expression of viveka is to understand the difference between Purusha and Prakriti. Any expression of Prakriti. Viveka comes from vich, to separate. And you reduplicate the prefix viveka, which means to separate, the ability to separate intensely. What are you separating in the highest stages of yoga? Purusha and Prakriti. So that's the ultimate goal of yoga. And here it is. And then we have Kaivalya again. So what is, okay, so the knowledge born of Viveka Jam, is a tarakam, a liberator, gives liberation. It has everything at its object at all times. So you know everything about Prakriti, everything. You potentially, I'm not saying all yogis go there, but potentially you know everything. The qualified yogi can know every subatomic particle, and by knowing everything, then absolutely knows the difference between everything and consciousness itself. The observer and the experiences of everything. Everything is out there. Everything is not self-aware. Prakriti is not self-aware. It's just dead, inanimate. It's achit, no chit, achit. So the ultimate knowledge is to know everything, but you still haven't, that's not ultimate. But then to realize, to know the difference between the conscious observer and everything. And I guess partly what he's doing is saying, and literally everything. You can literally know everything. So there's no stone unturned. Like what do materialists say nowadays? They say, well, we don't know everything. There may be neurons, that consciousness is coming from neurons, right? There is some neurological combination that produces, right? What is a materialistic materialist today? Those who don't believe that consciousness is separate, they don't believe in an Atman, they believe everything. A materialist is someone that believes everything is material, and the explanation for all things, the causes of all things, will eventually be identified in matter. We don't need to posit an Atman. We don't need to posit a God. We don't need to posit some external type of substance. There's only matter. That's a materialist, okay? Philosophical materialist. I don't mean shopping in Fifth Avenue materialist. I mean a philosophical materialist. Now, the philosophical materialist will say, well, we don't know everything. We haven't gone down to the subatomic level, and we haven't figured out which subatomic entities, when they combine, produce consciousness as a byproduct, as an epiphenomenon. That's the belief. The belief of a materialist, right? The hard problem of consciousness. You've all heard this phrase. Nobody knows what this consciousness is. But a materialist is committed to a faith position, a belief position, which is, well, we don't know what it is, but we believe we will discover it in matter itself. We don't have to posit some mysterious thing called a soul or an Atman, okay? Now, so the materialists say, well, we don't know everything. We haven't gotten down to this subatomic level yet. When we do, in the future, we will discover what they call the neurological correlates of consciousness. Well, they call that maybe 10, 20 years ago. Maybe they're using different language now. Doesn't matter. They're looking for what is it that produces, what were the conditions? What are the conditions that when you have those conditions, consciousness manifests, right? Like the ancient Indian materialist Charvaka says, you get alcohol, you get fruit juice, and you put it in the sun, and just under the certain conditions, bada boom, it ferments and it becomes alcohol, right? So that's and the Indian materialist said this, the Indian materialist. So in the same way, matter under certain conditions becomes manifest consciousness. So the materialist will say, well, we don't know what those conditions is. So what is this verse saying? This verse is saying the yogi knows everything, every neuron, every subatomic particle, every single entity out there, and knows consciousness is different. So you can no longer say, well, we haven't discovered the conditions yet. We don't know which subatomic particles combining in which sort of way produces consciousness as an epiphenomenon. This verse is saying, nah, the yogi knows every single material substance and its possible combination, and recognizes that consciousness is distinct. Look at the verse. So therefore, right, all of this, you know, that you can know everything, even the example, right? What's he doing all this for? You know the difference between one apple and another because you know it's subatomic, right? Previous verse, you know that every atom and its movement, right? So you can't say this, when this atom moves and combines with that atom and this other atom comes along, then consciousness is produced. No, you know it all. You know all of this, and you know, and when the purity, so where does he say it? Oh, he must have said it before. Here, only for one who discerns the difference between the Purusha and the intellect do omniscience and omnipotence accrue. It's not quite what I was going with that, but anyway. But that's the ultimate act of viveka, is to understand this difference. And Patanjali is saying, and you understand it based on full knowledge of every single subatomic particle in the universe. There's no way anybody can say to you, well, we haven't discovered the conditions under which consciousness is produced from matter. Can't say that because the yogi understands every single condition. Okay, so anyway, one more verse. When the purity of the intellect is equal to that of Purusha, the intellect is sattva. It becomes so sattvic. This is asmita samadhi, the last stage of sabija. Mind reflects consciousness, Purusha back to itself. It's the last. It's the last thought or the last experience of Purusha before it enters into experience of its own nature, Svarupa Vastas. The penultimate, the very last thing is Asmita Samadhi, when the sattva of the intellect is so sattvic, it's like a mirror, no blockage, no distortion. They talk about it as the mirror of the mind. That's the metaphor they use. It's hard to understand it. Take it or leave it. It reflects back. The mirror of the mind reflects Purusha. Asmi. Asmi means I am. So then the mind realizes that's who I really am. Not me. I'm not the mind. I'm not the real. It's all this ignorance is in the mind. Avidya, the klesha is all in the mind. To think that I'm body, mind, that's a mental construct. So then the mind realizes that it's not the real self. Asmi, it's like, oh, that's who I am. Asmita, because it reflects Purusha. So actually that experience is a mental experience. And then the mind then sort of dissolves. It doesn't literally dissolve. It just becomes completely and utterly inactive. And then Purusha, and it's very difficult to understand that eureka moment. That's why Advaita Vedanta says, well, it was never there in the first place. It's a superimposition because it's a very tricky. We had an MA student really interested in that last final moment before liberation. What that transition from a mental state to a state of pure consciousness, that transitional moment, you can't pin it down with the intellect. So that's it, my friends. And so therefore, and then we end up with, so when the purity of the intellect, sattva purushayaho shuddhi samye, when they're the same, kevalya. That same word kevalya, which probably occurs, I don't know, at least we've had it twice or three times in this chapter, and it's at least once in chapter 2, and I can't remember it about chapter 4. That's it, my friends. 2 hours and 17 minutes, a couple of questions, if anybody wishes. And remember, next week, I'm pretty sure, I have no reason to doubt, but in case I don't have a good internet connection, and I will put a message on the website. saying, I'm sorry, if I need to postpone. I'm not going to send the message out to the entire list because there's 50 pages. It takes me a while to even, is Peter Jones up there? Peter? Where's Peter's not up there? Okay. He's going to join us tonight. Peter Jones is one of my few, I've got like 2 friends on the Isle of Wight. And okay, so Oleg.
Hello, Professor Bryant, and
Hello.
thank you very much.
Welcome.
My question is about, we have a Samkhya chart. We have a Buddhi, we have a Hamkara, and evolutes from there like manas and the elements. My question is, from your perspective, what is the best way to think about this flow? Are those Buddhi and the Hamkara and manas, are they kind of categorically, ontologically separate things? Or is it like a spectrum? We have like a spectrum of Buddhi and it like kind of gradually densifies into a Hamkara, which gradually densifies into manas. And we just name those things as a way of kind of delineating this continuous spectrum, or they are really kind of just distinct, different entities from each other.
You can think of it both ways, but I mean, Prakriti is one thing. We were discussing it earlier. There was a time when I thought the 3 gunas were distinct things, but I don't think that anymore. I don't think they're 3 different things like red, yellow, and blue are different things. So I think it's just Prakriti. And now I think of it as what you just said, a densification going from sattva to tamas, the potential of Prakriti to manifest any of those 3 gunas, that potential devolves, if you want to use that term, transforms from sattva to tamas. So I see it as, on the one hand, there's just one thing, but on the other hand, when it's, clearly the eye is different, the visual is different from nasal ability, smell is different from sight, so on another level, they are distinct things. You cannot smell through your ears, you cannot eat through your eyes. So clearly there are categories with their own specific features. So I think it's both.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tim.
Okay. So my question has to do with the chart again. And I'm just wondering, as far as how the gunas densify to create prakrti, and how that becomes buddhi, and that eventually becomes the gross elements. Do you think, I'm really struggling with how to phrase this question, but do you think, I'm going to read what I wrote here. Do you think it would be accurate to say that raw intelligence itself, or buddhi, is just sort of like information feedback pathways through prakrti?
I mean, I think we need to explore the language you just used with, I think, because Sankhya has always engaged its intellectual landscape across the centuries. So it's had to engage different conceptual systems and theoretical systems, and which have their own vocabulary. So if nowadays we want to talk about informational, whatever you just said, informational pathways,
Just like a logical exchange of like an exchange, a feedback loop sort of logic through matter, through space. Could that be considered?
Yeah, if you wanted to look at it that way, that systemizing, that logic, that feedback, that language would be karma. You would have to find a conversation partner between whatever you're calling information and whatever those informational patterns are, loops, or however you want to frame it. That would correspond. It's karma that activates Prakriti to take the specific, to evolve and take the specific forms that end up in the world we perceive out there. So karma is information, because karma is the reaction of all the jivas that are going to be re-injected into Prakriti in the next cycle. All their karma comes with it, every single individual, and there's billions and billions and billions and trillions of them, all of them with their own individual karma, which all has to combine with every other entity's karma. That whole mess of karma is information, meaning things are going to happen to each of those Atmans. They're going to take particular births and they're going to suffer, just like Patanjali says in chapter 2. So that is information, and that is what organizes the gunas to densify and take the shapes. Everything is out there for karmic reason. There's nothing random. Nothing random. There could be a rock, 5 miles down in the core, the bowels of the earth, but it's there for a reason. Maybe some ant is going to bump into it in year, 8,200,000, whatever it is. Everything is karmically, it's all information, if you want to think of karma as information. What would be your response to that?
I don't know. I think with questions and just trying to think about things in such an abstract way, even if it's technically accurate, semantics becomes the obstacle. And maybe I should try to figure out how to phrase the question better for next class. But
well, think about this then. If you want to talk about information, right? Information, can we say information is systematics? In other words, it's a systematized system of knowledge, or a systemized system. Can we say something like that? When you say information, give me a definition of information.
Well, at the most raw conceivable level, like for instance, even without an awareness of a soul, like if you're talking about before the creation of ego, raw intelligence existing that results just from Prakriti, I would think of that kind of, and maybe I'm misconceiving it completely, but I would kind of imagine, I'm trying to figure out how to, I would imagine that being like, any kind of cause and effect interaction is going to create a change on both the cause side and the effect side. So that right there would immediately become potentially, you could, I don't know if this is making any sense, but you could conceive of that as an information pathway. And if you have enough, complexity of, logical sort of interplay like that, it could eventually create sort of
an information field. So everything you said just then, you could replace the word information. You would have to replace the word information if you want to represent Sankhya metaphysics with the word karma, because any notion of cause and effect is karma, and any interaction between one entity and another entity is karma. And that entire combination of all individual interactions, along with every other individual action, that whole, what you're calling an information field, is karma. So for next week, think about that and see if that works or doesn't work in terms of what you understand. When I say you, what is wherever this language of information field is coming from, go into that a little bit more deeply and see what kind of a bridge that notion of an information field, what kind of a bridge that might have with karma theory, and we'll pick it up next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Rhonda.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the inconsistency in chapter 3 because of comparing in the years ago, trying to compare the
Rhonda, you froze.
in chapter 3 and out of like 17 translations, 10 have the 55 verses and 7 had 56 verses. And where that middle verse comes, and I didn't know where until I started studying Sanskrit with you and my other classes and being able to look at Vyasa's commentary, is that extra verse is the very last verse in Sutra 321, and then 322 is right the next verse. So what it was before I really learned about the different manuscript lines of the Yoga Sutras, but that is such a highlighted one because it's almost a 50-50 split between the commentators like yourself, who it seems to be the most of them have 195 verses in the Yoga Sutras versus 196, which, like Swami Satchidananda, includes that verse that the extra one where it's just a short verse and it starts with Itena, because of this, and it's inconsequential. Actually, you don't include it, but the other manuscript lines do. And I just think that's important for people to know, because when we start to compare commentaries, the numbering's going to be off for chapter 3.
So you're saying between 331 and between 331 and 32?
Yep, that's where it is. And then because of when learning the Sanskrit, you can see that the manuscript lines that included the extra verse is the last line in Vyasa's commentary.
In other words, Vyasa's commentary in some versions ends up being a sutra unto itself.
Yeah, so somewhere in the manuscript recopying some manuscript line added, they put because of this, which is that last verse.
Yeah.
They added that as 322. And then so Prakramam, New Prakramam, that one is right the next one. So it's just nice for people to know, because you wouldn't know that unless you were also following along with Vyasa's commentary.
Very true. Thank you so much. That's very interesting, Rhonda. Thank you for that. Yeah. Great. And you're doing Sanskrit then?
Yes, I have been doing it with you for 4 years.
Oh, okay. And you're
2020. I was in your class back then, and I study it with some other resources I study with as well.
Excellent.
So
you're doing chapter 7 then. Yeah, well done. Great. Okay, John.
First of all, thank you for this. This is wonderful. I mean, this is such a deep dive into, it's kind of like a mise en scène of the first pada, where, we get a deeper understanding of what Buddha goes through and what are the pitfalls and how to avoid becoming a prakriti laya, which we're at risk of.
Yeah.
And how, by practicing abhyasa and vairagya at every step of the way through each of these sutras, we kind of become more and more sattvic, and what that leads us to. And I really appreciate how you are reading between the lines on this, so that we can kind of contemplate these sutras almost like a Zen koan, where it kind of leads us to, each of them. And it kind of brings us to this brink of where within us we've got this Buddhi that's incredibly refined. And then even below that, if we can continue to discipline our focus, our ekagrata, so that it gets sharper and sharper, it kind of blurs with the practice of vairagya, where the vairagya is the sharpening of ekagrata. And ekagrata is the sharpening of vairagya. So the two kind of blur together. So we're kind of brought to this brink, kind of like Dante, at the brink of the experience of, beatific vision, where, the Purusha is inside us and we're kind of perceiving it, where it leads to. And, what it kind of shakes up in me is the Mandukya Upanishad, where you've got, the waking state, which is kind of the focus on the gross material, and then the dreaming state, which is the focus on the subtle, and then the deep sleep state, which I'm wondering, have any of the commentators talked about it as buddhi? kind of not the unconscious aspect of it, but the conscious part of it, where we are in
Shankara
this.
takes it to be an experience of Brahman.
Buddhi.
Shankara does, yeah. He takes
Shankara says that that deep sleep pragya.
Actually, the Atman experiences Brahman in deep sleep. But anyway,
But it's still like Buddhi. It's a matter.
Well, his
Buddhi at
opponent,
its highest level.
yeah, his opponents
Viveka.
would say that, yes. John, thank you so much. I have to stop soon. We'll take one more question because I'm worried about this becoming too long to be attachable. But thank you for those comments. And we'll just take Federico, my good friend from.
Hi, what's up?
Anybody goes to Rome, Federico will take you around. He's a professional tour guide. He knows excellent places for vegan ice cream.
Yes.
He said, want some boga? He is a boga. He can give you boga or yoga.
Boga, come to Rome.
Either one, whatever you like. The sutras, they give you boga or yoga. So Federico can give you either. Allora.
Hi, Edwin. Well, first, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I was wondering about this, and this is the first time I actually wonder about this. And okay, we know that the Yoga Sutra is in some way our canonical text now, right? In the West, at least.
Well, I mean, for some communities, like it is for Iyengar, it's true.
Yeah. Well, it's
not for everybody. It's not
popular.
You go ahead.
Yes, I mean, at least. Well, but my question is not about the West, actually.
Okay.
It's a system, right? You always say that it's like the Patanjalian system, which is a system and has a grand finale, which is Chitta Nivritti Nirodha, which is a different grand finale than many other different systems, right?
Yeah.
And so you have all other systems, like you can be a Krishna Bhakta and you have one grand finale and one process. You can be like a Shaiva Bhakta, you have one grand, and all this, and you can be a Tantric, and you have, a different system, right? Than Patanjali yoga. Yeah. Okay, and they all have traditions, they all have gurus, they all have disciples, and it's still today, and they all have canonical texts, right?
Yeah.
So what the Yoga Sutra has a tradition that consider the Yoga Sutra a canonical text, because this is confusing, because it's also like Guruji is a Bhakta, actually, and so the grand finale is not Chitta Vritti Nirodha for his tradition, but we know it's something else.
Vishnu,
so what is the context in which the Yoga Sutra is actually followed? I mean, are there like, traditions that use the Yoga Sutra and have that goal or no, or like it informs in different ways, different traditions?
I think it's both. When the British went to India and they were collecting texts, right? Initially, they were interested in the Vedas because they're interested in the Indo-European issue and they're interested in the origins of European culture, right? So the Sanskrit texts, being the oldest in the Indo-European family, they thought would give them a window into the pre-proto history of Europe. So eventually, though, they went around and they collected up, the Dharma Shastras, the earliest things that were translated. The Gita was translated at the end of the 1800s by Wilkins and so on and so forth. But they couldn't find any living yoga tradition in the Yoga Sutra tradition. They found Nyayikas, they found Vedantins, they found Mimamsas schools, right? So they actually had Brahmins who were situating themselves in the lineages. But in the 1800s and that, the British could not find any actual lineages following the Yoga Sutras autonomously as a tradition unto itself. Some people say that Hariharananda was kind of like the last Sankhya-chara. Remember, Sankhya and Yoga are the same thing. So Hariharananda was in the colonial period, and he was a real Patanjali and yogi, and he ended up sort of sitting in a cave, not speaking to anybody, and his disciples, there was a hole in the wall. Disciples sort of communicated through that hole. So it Hariharananda, and I recommend his commentary in the Yoga Sutras. But basically, if that's so, so mostly yoga has then, okay, I think of yoga, Patanjali's yoga, as the sort of method that then gets appropriated into the Shaiva tradition, and they, of course, add stuff on top of it, right? And the Krishna tradition, they're going to take the Isha Pranidhana, and they're just going to totally develop that. And you fix your mind on Vishnu and his feet, and da 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 da. So they're going to completely put the Ishvara element on steroids. So I think of the 8 limbs. 8 limbs is the method that everybody, even Buddhists, had their 8 limbs. Jains have the 8 limbs, and so it's basic method. The Patanjalian one takes you to your Atman. Other methods take you to different goals, as you said. But yeah, I think of it as a method that then gets kind of appropriated into all these different other different possibilities. So your question is, are there anyone that's really doing? I mean, I think there are, we know Hariharananda.
Totally, but also that their actual goal is Chitta Vritti Nirodha and not something
absolutely. I'm sure there are. Bhakti is pretty much swept over the subcontinent, but I have no reason to doubt that there are many who, even if they Chitta Vritti Nirodha on Ishvara, they're still doing Chitta Vritti Nirodha, and they still seek the Atman as opposed to Bhagavan or any other possibility. I mean, Hariharananda we know about because he wrote his commentary, but I would have no reason to doubt that there are, even though the British didn't find anybody. Well, that's a British problem. I mean, but I don't see any reason why we should doubt that. But mostly people, most traditions now are Shaiva, Vaishnava, Shakta. They're heavily embedded. They may follow the 8 limbs, but it's embedded within a larger devotional metaphysics and ontology. But I don't see any reason why there aren't yogis that are not interested in that, and that are doing Chitta Vritti Nirodha to have a Swarupa Vastanam experience. I have no reason to doubt that. It's just mostly, for me in India, I operate within a Vrindavan Braj kind of landscape. So the Babas and yogis that I hang out with are all bhaktas. But I think if you went up to the Himalayas and Rishikesh and these kind of more jnana places, more kind of Atman focused places, yeah, why not?
Okay.
Yeah. My friends will call it a day or a night. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick look through the chats in case there's anything I need to know about. You can all log off. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
And we'll do chapter 3. And if and
Thank
look
you.
out in case I need to get in touch with you, I will leave a message on the website. But I have no reason to think we won't meet.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Good night.
I see Radhe Sham.
Thank you
Thank
again.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Okay.
Jetzt ist er weg.